continuing our discussion on the subject of the marriage being under attack. And last week we looked at the subject of marriage being under attack, and we looked at beginning in the Old Testament, and we went back to the foundation and the institution of the instituting of marriage way back in the beginning when the creation of man and woman in the Garden of Eden. And then we looked at some of the laws that God gave in the Old Covenant that demonstrated what man was responsible for and woman in the relationship of marriage. Now, we began looking at some things in the subject of the law of marriage under the law of Christ, and we began by looking at Matthew 5:32. And when we ended last week, we were showing you that there are differences between what Moses taught and what's taught under the law of Christ. Under the law of Moses, fornication, you were put away by death. You couldn't marry anyone else because you were put to death. If you committed fornication, then you and the person that you committed it with would be put to death. Under the law of Christ, you put away by divorce, but you cannot marry another. The one who's been sinned against can, but the one who committed the act, they're not allowed to remarry. Divorce. Well, under the old law, in Deuteronomy 24, there was a cause short of adultery. You could put them away for some uncleanness or shamefulness, but that does not, that provision is not in the law of Christ. There's no divorce for any cause short of fornication or adultery. If the maid is divorced and there's no fornication, you may marry another without adultery if you give her a bill of divorcement. But again, remember that was under the old law. Under the new law, same situation. The maid divorces, not for fornication. You can't marry another, and if either party marries another, God says that's adultery. And the man who marries the one that's been put away, if she has a bill of divorcement, then it's not adultery because they have a bill of divorcement. But again, that's under the old law. Under the new law of Christ, the man who marries the one who's been put away, he commits adultery when he marries her. That's an adulterous relationship. And last, the first man can't have her back. Let's say under the old law, he gives her a bill of divorcement, she marries another man, he dies, he's still not married, he can't take her back because he's already divorced her and she had been married to another man, so he can't take her back. But in the law of Christ, if the one who commits adultery, he repents, and the one who he committed against forgives him, they could reconcile, they could come back, and he could have her because that's who he's bound to by God in the covenant. And so you see there are differences between the law of Moses and the law of Christ. Now what many people try to do today is they try to expand the law of Christ by bringing these points from the old law and bringing them into the new law. Well, that won't work because this law was nailed to the cross. So we don't live under that law anymore. And so these restrictions and these instructions under the old law are no longer binding today. We live under the law of Christ, the gospel dispensation, and we must follow the law of Christ. Now, in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 32, and we will read that again just so we can understand, to remind you, this is one of the passages we examined last week in Matthew 5 verse 32. But I say to you, whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Now notice, whosoever, that means anyone. That means whether a person is a Christian, whether they believe in God, it doesn't matter. The marriage law is a universal law. It applies to everyone. Whoever puts away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, that means except for the cause of fornication. That must be the reason. The reason must be adultery, fornication, sexual immorality. That must be the reason. No other reason does God give to end and sever a marriage. And it says it causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries her, that divorce commits adultery. Now, let's put the rule and exception. Whoever shall put away his wife for fornication is not responsible for her subsequent adultery. And whoever shall marry her that is divorced commits adultery. You see, causes her to commit adultery. What's that mean? That means if a person divorces another person for something other than adultery, other than sexual immorality, then they place the temptation of fornication or adultery in that person's life because they have ended the marriage relationship. Now, if that person succumbs to the temptation and commits adultery with another person and even marries that person, then God says that is an adulterous marriage. That is a sinful marriage and one that condemns that person and both parties until they get out of that marriage. Now, they're going to be held accountable for their adultery. But the one who divorced the other person when they did not have cause, they also share in the blame because they set the table for that sin when they ended a marriage that they didn't have God's authority to end. And so even though the two parties are guilty of adultery and they will be held accountable unless they repent and cease to sin, so will the person who divorced the other party when they did not have grounds. And so God will hold that person accountable. And so that just simply means that we need to take serious that the only cause for divorce is for adultery. Now, I understand in our country you can get divorced for anything, but that doesn't mean God recognizes it. God's law is very strict, and he only gives one cause, and that's for the cause of adultery. Now, all men are under the one marriage law. Marriage is honorable and the bed's undefiled. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4. In Genesis chapter 2, when man shall leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Genesis 2:24. That's the universal marriage law, and all men are under that law. All men, whether they are Christians, whether they're believers in God, whatever nation they live in, it makes no difference. Now, every nation may have different types of marriage laws. There may be things that each state or even countries have different restrictions and have different regulations regulating marriage, but the universal law of marriage, and that means the binding of a man and woman together in a covenant relationship, all men are susceptible to that, and all men are going to be held accountable for that, whether they agree with it or not. God said that is a universal law. One man, one woman for life. Remember, whatever God is joined together, man is not to put asunder. Now, in Romans chapter 7, he uses the illustration of marriage. He says in verse 2, for the woman who has a husband is bound by the law to her husband as long as he lives. But if the husband dies, she is released from the law of her husband. You see? By death. One man, one woman for life. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 39. And we'll have much to say about 1 Corinthians 7 in just a moment. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, in verse number 39, the scripture says the wife is bound as long as her husband lives. But if her husband dies, she is at liberty to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. Now that phrase, only in the Lord, means by in a relationship that the Lord looks at as being authorized, as being honorable. Now, if a woman's husband dies, she's free to marry, but she can't marry one who's been put away for adultery. She can't marry a divorced person who's been divorced for been divorced for some other cause other than adultery. She can't do that because that person's not an acceptable marriage partner because they have violated the law of God. So when it says only in the Lord, that means by according to the Lord as one that the Lord would recognize as being marriageable, eligible. If he's not eligible, then she can't marry him because then she will enter in an adulterous relationship. And so we see that the Bible pattern for marriage, all men are under the one marriage law, and it's one man, one woman for life. Now I understand that in our society that is just disregarded. I understand that. I'm well aware of that, and you are too. But that doesn't change God's law. Now man can become acquainted, and he can keep the laws of the land, and he can accept the law of the land and their understanding of marriage, but that won't change God's law, and that won't change their responsibility to God's law. Now that's just the way that it is, And I know men fight against that, and many churches, they'll go along with whatever the legal apparatus is and whatever the legal system calls for, they'll accept, and they're going to weaken the marriage relationship, and they're going to weaken the institution by accepting marriages and divorces for any cause. And now the thing that's under great consideration and discussion is homosexual marriages. And again, many of the mainstream religions are caving in, and they're giving in to that. But again, that doesn't change God's law. You know, it could become the law of the land. I know the Supreme Court passed last year that they could give marriage licenses and they could be married. And you know what? Our civil law could change according to how our nation looks at it. But that doesn't change God's law. God doesn't join them together. They can get a certificate. They can get married. They can find a minister to marry them. But they won't be married in the sight of God because God doesn't join them together. Why? Because that's not a marriage. A marriage is one man, one woman. That's the biblical definition, and that's the only definition of marriage. And again, man's understanding and man's law doesn't trump God's law. You see, marriage and divorce is regulated by God. There's only one exception. That exception is for the cause of adultery. If you've been sinned against, you have the right by God to end that marriage and get out of it if your mate committed adultery against you. That's under the law of Christ. That is the only exception. You can't get divorced because you're not pretty anymore. You can't get because you can't cook anymore. You can't get divorced because you want somebody younger. You can't get divorced because you fall out of love. Because he's a gambler, because he's a drunkard. Those are not reasons for divorce. Now, they make marriage very difficult. I understand that, but that's not a cause for divorce in the sight of God. Now, you can get divorced for all those things under the law of the land, but that doesn't change God's law, and that's what you and I need to come to understand. God's law takes precedence over the law of the land. And again, you are free to act according to the law of the land. You can do that. But it will not change how God views your relationship and how God judges whether that relationship is lawful or unlawful. And so, all facets of marriage, the coming together, the covenant, who can marry, who can enter it, who can leave it, who can do it with God's approval, all of that is regulated and is authorized by God through the Scripture. Now, man can either accept it or he can accept something inferior. That's his choice. But neither thing is going to change what God's Word teaches. Now, in Matthew 19, the Pharisees came to Jesus and they had a question, and its question is relevant even in our time. Pharisees also came to him, testing him, saying, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason?" And he answered and said to them, "Have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." Notice, they asked the question, and it's pertinent in our day. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason? Well, that's a germane question today. We could ask that same question today. Can man divorce his wife for just any reason? And he doesn't go back to the law of Moses. He doesn't go back to the covenant under the law of Moses. He goes back to the beginning. He goes back for the time that marriage was instituted in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. And he said that man shall leave his father and mother, and the two shall become one flesh. That is the cornerstone of the marriage relationship. Now it goes on to say, so then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Now, this is talking about the intimacy and the sexual relationship that is a privilege that is in the marriage relationship. And so the two become one flesh. They're joined together. And they are man and woman, and they're joined in this one flesh, and they become a union. And they enter a covenant, and they enter a marriage. And then he says in verse 6, therefore what God has joined together, let not man separate. Now, God said very plainly that what God's joined together, man is not to separate. Now, God would not have put that prohibition in his law if man could not do that. He would not say they cannot separate if it was impossible for him to do so. He can't separate, but God says he's not to separate. He only can separate that relationship if God gives him the authority to, and the only authority we will see in a minute is adultery. Then they ask him, why did Moses command to give a certificate of divorce to put her away? Now, they're talking about Deuteronomy 24. Remember, the law of Moses is still in effect because the Lord is still living and he hasn't died on the cross yet. And so they're still living under the law of Moses. And they are right. God did give a consentment and variation legislation in Deuteronomy 24 that gave her a certificate of divorce. But listen to the Lord's answer. He said to them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wife. But from the beginning it was not so. Yes, God permitted it. He tolerated it. But from the beginning that was not God's design. That was not God's purpose. And so even this law back in Deuteronomy 24 was trying to regulate and to force them to go back to the beginning to be one man and one woman for life. That's what he was trying to bring them back to, because they were treating their wives as property. They were abusing them, and they were abusing the relationship. And God was trying to bring them back to the original concept and the original design. But the key for us is in verse number 9. Verse 9 says, and I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. And whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery. His disciples said to him, if such is the case of the man with his wife, it is better not to marry. Now notice, he says whoever. Whoever, that means man or woman. That means whether they're a believer in God or an unbeliever. It doesn't matter. Whoever enters this relationship and divorces his wife, except, that means if and only if. This means this is the only reason that you can sever a marriage, is for the cause of adultery. And if it's for the cause of adultery and you marry another, you commit adultery. If you divorce for any other cause, if you divorce because he's a drunkard, if you divorce because he's a gambler, if you divorce because he's abusive, if you divorce because you don't love him anymore, you divorce her because she's not pretty anymore, you divorce them for any other reason you want to put. You fill in the blank in anything you want. If the cause is not for adultery, and you divorce them, and you enter another marriage, that is adultery. Now you know how strict that is? The disciples understood it. He said if that's the law, it's better for a man not to marry. Because when he marries, he's got to do it for life. And so maybe it's better that he not get married because he might make a mistake. Did they understand the restriction and the narrowness of this law? Yeah, they understood it. They understood that it meant that when they made that commitment, it was for life. They understood it. So they said, well, maybe it's better that we not marry than that we would marry and then we would get an unscriptural divorce and then we could never marry again. And so again, they understood. Sad part is, men can understand today, they just don't agree with it. But then he goes, what the text teaches? One man, one woman for life. That's what it teaches. That's what Matthew 19 teaches. One man, one woman for life. It's very narrow. It's very strict. They understood it was that way. So they thought it was better not to marry. Jesus reaffirms Genesis 2:24. For this reason, man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two of them shall become one flesh. This agrees way back in Genesis 2:24 when the marriage institution was first designed and first given, when Eve was given to Adam in marriage. That's when it was instituted. And this law under Christ reaffirms that principle. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. He quotes from Genesis 2:24. Why? Because that's God's marriage law. That's where he was when he instituted the relationship. It was for the betterment of man and woman. It was to be one man, one woman for life. That was the law in the beginning, and under the law of Christ, that is the law today. That man and woman entered this covenant with God's approval, and both being lawful to marry, and they are to remain in that marriage until death, or unless one party commits adultery. And then again, it's a choice. They don't have to end the marriage. They could forgive the person. They could work it out and stay together. But there is the option and the right for the one who's been sinned against to end that relationship if they so choose to do so. Now, it requires one man and one woman, a man and his wife. Now again, this is the reason a homosexual marriage is not a marriage. You don't have one man and one woman. You don't have a man and a wife. You don't have male and female. You have two men. You have two women. That is not the one flesh relationship. That is not two parties. And so that's why that can never be defined by marriage by God, because it's not a marriage, because it's not between a man and a woman. Marriage is defined by God between a man and his wife, a male and a female. It excludes all immorality. It excludes all of it. A man and his wife means one flesh. What does that exclude? That excludes fornication. That excludes premarital sex. That excludes adultery, having sexual relations with someone that's not your mate. That polygamy, having more than one wife. Concubines, having a mistress, having somebody on the side. It excludes that. Homosexuality. It excludes that because it's not a one-man, one-woman relationship. Bestiality, being joined with an animal. It excludes that. And so all those things would be sexual immorality. All sexual immorality is forbidden by the one flesh, one man, and one woman relationship. All this other is a sin. And if you enter any of these areas, you are guilty of sin. And you will be lost if you don't repent and come out of any of these cases of immorality. All those things are immorality. Now again, the world doesn't agree. Fornication, adultery, polygamy, in most places, plural marriages are not allowed, but there are some places in the world where it is, concubines. People have mistresses, people turn a dim eye to that, they accept it. And of course, homosexuals are married today. And again, bestiality is not something that's practiced, at least not openly, not yet. But the next thing that's going to come on is pedophiles, and wait and see. You know, I'm not a prophet, but if we're going to accept all these other things, that's going to be in the list someday. But God says all of that is sexual immorality, and that is excluded in the one man and one woman relationship. It implies immorality desecrates the union. It is grounds for the innocent to put away the guilty. A man and his wife cleave in one flesh. This desecrates the union. If man commits sexual immorality in any of these ways, then that desecrates the union and gives ground for the innocent one to put away the guilty. That is the only grounds that God gives, and he only gives it to the innocent. He doesn't give it to both parties. When I lived in Las Vegas, there was a gospel preacher that took the position that adultery frees both parties. No, it does not. Go and read the text. It doesn't free both parties. It only frees the one who has the right to put that person away. The Bible is absolutely silent about that other person. And if that other person enters another marriage after they've been put away for the cause of adultery, and they marry another, that's an adulterous relationship. And that condemns both parties and enter it. Even if the other party has the right to marry, she doesn't have a right to marry that man. And when she enters that marriage, that is an adulterous marriage. Now again, that's very narrow. That's very strict, but that's the law. That's God's law. That's why you need to make absolutely sure when you enter a marriage that that's the person you want to spend the rest of your life with. You need to make sure that that is who you want, because God's going to hold you to that commitment. And so it's a very serious decision. And it's a very serious choice that you should give great consideration to, and you should give great thought to before you enter it. This excludes to put away fornicator from marrying another. The Bible is silent about that. If that fornicator marries another person, God says that is an adulterous relationship. Even if that other person has never been married. Even if that person is free to marry, by God's own definition, they can't marry that person because that would be commit and it would constitute adultery. And so we see that obedience is blessed, Deuteronomy 10:13, but sins bring hardship, not privileges. The way of the transgressor is hard. And so when you violate God's law, it's going to be difficult. It's not going to be easy. And so man has to determine whether he's going to abide by the law of Christ or whether he'll go to the law of the land. Now, let me sum this up for us for today, and we'll get back to this next week. The question that you have to ponder, the thing you have to think about, is what law are you going to live under? Now, if you live under the law of Christ, you're going to understand that one man, one woman, and it's a lifetime commitment to only be severed by death, and the only cause that that marriage relationship can end with God's approval and by the authority of Christ is for the cause of adultery. Now that's God's law, and we've showed you very plainly in the scripture that that's what God's law is. Now man has a very different concept. You can practice all sorts of sexual immorality. You can practice fornication. You can practice adultery. You can have your mistress. You could even go in some countries and you could have plural wives and live in polygamy. And homosexual marriages now are looked at as favorably and acceptable. Now it's legal even in our nation. But again, all of that is man's law. All of that is man's doing. All that tries to undo what God's law says. Now, man has to make a decision. Is he going to abide by the law of Christ, or is he going to abide by the law of men? Now, all men are going to be held accountable to the law of Christ, whether they believe it or whether they accept it or whether they practice it. When you enter a marriage relationship, it's going to be defined by God, not by man. But you have the right to enter a marriage relationship that man and the world call acceptable, but God does not. And so the difference is God recognizes one, he doesn't the other, and the other will be condemned and cause a man to lose their soul, the man and the woman, if they don't repent. Now I understand the other way is easier. Man's law is a lot easier, a lot more flexible, and you can get in and out of marriage like you get in and out of your clothes. You can do it. I know. I lived in a place for 13 years where you could get divorced for $125. Now you can do it. But the question you need to ask, does that change God's law? And the answer is absolutely not. That's why marriage is under attack. Marriage is not the problem. The marriage relationship is not the problem. The problem is man does not respect God's definition and God's pattern for marriage. That's the problem. And people go into marriage with wrong concepts and with wrong understandings, expecting things that they do not know because they've never looked at marriage from God's definition. And so we would encourage you to look at God's definition. All the young people are listening to me today. Maybe you're not married yet. Maybe you're dating someone. You need to understand that's a serious step. And you need to make sure that you want to spend the rest of your life with that person. And if you're not sure you can do that, maybe you don't need to marry that person. Because it's serious. God's going to hold you accountable when you enter that relationship. Now that's just the facts, and you need to think about that. I hope you will think about that.